What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a discussion-oriented video around the length of video games. So normally I review a lot of video games, I make guides and builds and stuff for all the games that I play, that type of thing. And in reviewing a lot of games, sometimes I'll mention whether or not a game is shorter or longer for me. And as you might imagine, there are people that disagree with those statements. But generally speaking, I still try to give an average run time to people. Because while I personally don't think that the length of a game is necessarily indicative of its quality, I do think it is probably wise to know how much time you need to set aside, so to speak, when you purchase a game. But like a great many subjects in life, I think the only correct answer to this question is whether or not the game is too long or too short for you in particular. Now, just to get it out of the way, for me personally, a sweet spot for the length of a video game tends to run about 40 to 50 hours. But that said, I review and 100% a ton of games, which means I often spend a great deal longer than that on particular games, and games that are around the 20 to 30 hour mark tend to feel a bit short to me. But to be fair, I do this for a living, so a 20-hour game is like maybe a couple days tops. Whereas you look at somebody who only has a couple hours in a day, and a 20 to 30-hour game could take a significant amount of time to complete, in terms of when you started playing to the date you actually finish it. And simply because of that alone, I think this is a subject where absolutely no one is ever going to reach a consensus on exactly how long things should be, and it really comes down to a more individual basis. Now, one thing I will say is that when it comes to the price of a game versus its length, etc., and the value proposition offered, I think that's where things get a little more convoluted just overall. Because then, not only are you looking at a person's subjective sense of how long a game should be, but also their subjective sense of how much their money is worth versus the time they spent on something. And again, while I do like to know roughly how long a game will take when I go into it, I think when you start applying things like money per hour, so to speak, in terms of your value, that's where it gets a little too muddled. I don't like thinking of video games that way. It's supposed to be an experience, at least in my opinion. And while sure, if I pay like $60 for something, I want a little more than like a 2-hour game. And there is a little bit of that at the same time, which further confuses the matter. And that's where I think, as a whole, people talking about this subject tend to run into problems, right? Because personally, while I might very much so enjoy a 10 to 15-hour game, I'm not going to feel good about spending $60 on that. I'm just not. But at the same time, just to use the game that was in the news recently, Dying Light 2 claiming that it's a 500-hour time to 100% complete with about an 80-hour average runtime, I also think that opposite end of the spectrum there is equally ridiculous. Because sure, if your game takes a very long time to complete, you could theoretically say that you're getting more hours per money. However, who's to say you enjoyed those hours? Because hundreds of hours spent on something you don't enjoy isn't something people fondly remember. And as a result of all of these factors, I think when it comes to deciding how long a game should be for you, tends to be some, let's pretend there's an actual equation for it, algorithm of all of those factors and your preference. Now, again, to reiterate, my personal preference, a full-price $60 game, I like to be around the 40 to 50-hour mark. Because in my experience with reviewing a ton of games, if it's longer than that, chances are there's some bloat in there somewhere. Even if there's not, you get to a point where you start to get some fatigue with it. For instance, this is back before I was even really doing YouTube all that intensely, but when The Witcher 3 launched and I played through it for the first time, I remembered being 80 hours in and still not having finished that game. And I don't mean I hadn't 100% it yet. I mean I literally hadn't finished the story at 80 hours into that game for the first time. And that for me, I was like, this story is going on way too long. And I actually did wind up 100%ing The Witcher 3. I did like 3 full run-throughs, which is helped along by the fact that The Witcher 3 is a great game to play. But the story itself, in my opinion, was entirely too long. But again, that's a matter of personal opinion, which I think is the primary factor for most people. It's just how they personally feel about a game. But for me, I think one of the more interesting subjects in the video game industry is exactly this. How long is too long? And how does the pricing and things like that go into people's purchasing decisions behind games? Now, I have a bit of a background in sales and stuff, so I admit I'm probably more fascinated by this stuff than most people. But in my personal experience, I tend to find that games, in my opinion, always tend to be around $5 to $10 more expensive than I think they should be. And there are very few occasions where I'm not like, this game was perfectly priced, you know? So again, overall, just a very interesting subject, and by all means, let me know how you feel about it down in the comments section below. Again, I don't think anybody is ever right or wrong on this particular subject. I think it's just a matter of personal opinion, and it's interesting to me to see marketing and people try to reconcile pricing and, their marketing versus people's perception of how long video games should be, which is such a variable thing on an individual level that I really like just seeing all of those factors and stuff come to play and watching all that stuff play out. But there you go, guys. Some weird insights to my thoughts about a subject. But nonetheless, hope you enjoyed the video. Again, by all means, let me know how you feel it down in the comment section below. But remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of it, truly, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.